All right. Hello, 14ers, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to Ministry Revealed. It is April 11th, 2022. It's getting exciting, isn't it? It's getting tense. It's getting exciting. I can't wait. Brothers and sisters, you know where we are. You know how close we are. We have seen these things being proven out through scripture for 4.5 years. It has been awesome. It has been so exciting, and I can't wait to see what comes next in his presence, guys. Could you imagine? The Bible tells us men's hearts, men's thoughts, they've never even been able to imagine what is coming next for us. We can't even fathom it. That is what's coming. The most glorious, the wow, awe-inspiring, that for the rest of eternity, for all of eternity, will always have us in awe, will always have us in wonder, in joy, in love, in peace with him, in him. I can't imagine what that's like. We talk about maybe having to be workers, and we've had these conversations here before, and I'm all for, if the Lord chooses me or chooses us or some of you, whatever the case may be, man, so be it. We will work, we will do whatever his will is. But man, oh man, what that will be like in his presence, to be there sooner rather than later, right? Right? Wasn't it Paul that said, I'm staying to do this for you guys, right? I would much rather be gone now than to endure all of this, but it is better for you that I am here than to be gone and to be with the Lord already, right? It's just that sense, like, and it's exciting, guys. I know we're biting our nails. It's having, I understand some people are even probably having issues with work, meaning, just trying to stay motivated, right? Or looking for things. Maybe some are looking for work and they're just not sure. Well, my son's looking for work. He knows the season and time. My son's looking for work. We have to do what we have to do while we're still living in this life. There are still things that have to get done. My wife, I mean, you would think me of all people with this ministry, right? The one being led into this revelation of it all. You would think I would tell my wife at this point, all right, honey, man, we're gone by mid-June. Sayonara, quit your work. Of course, I'm not going to say that. Of course, I'm not going to say that, because the Lord has not directly told me. The Lord has not spoken to me and said, thus saith the Lord, here is the day. Here is the confirmation. Okay, so we still have to occupy. And I know it's not always easy. I get it. Even my daughter in school, she's in high school in grade 11. I get it's not easy, especially when they're hearing their dad talk about these things and breaking down and all these scriptures coming in and out. And, I get it. But we have to be diligent, right? We have to be diligent in getting done what needs to be done for our families and for providing and so forth, and to do our work for the Lord, whether you're a cab driver, whether you're a ditch digger, whether you're a doctor, it doesn't matter. We all have what he's given us to do, and we need to provide. We need to do what we're supposed to do until that time comes, as we diligently seek him. All right? And that's what we're doing. We're going to continue to diligently seek him. We're going to continue to draw closer, no matter how close this day is, even being, a little over 2 months away. Could you imagine a little over 2 months away? It's so amazing. And we don't say this just frivolously. We have never said these things frivolously. We've been given this ministry, this revelation from Genesis to Revelation of all of these open books that have all supported and proven each other over and over and over again. The one thing that's given us difficulty all these years, these past 4 years, has been the 70th year of Israel. Well, that's no longer a difficulty for us, is it? And if that's no longer a difficulty for us and it's been understood, well, then it proves that this is the only year. This is the only year. And that makes it so incredibly exciting, so easily to diligently continue to seek Him, but also difficult to keep daily life going when we don't quite feel like it, right? So brothers and sisters, today we're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna keep diligently seeking. And what I want to do today is similar to a video. If you guys remember this video, it's part of the intro series, but this one called Why the Summary. See some of the major revelations that we had. Well, I've been wanting to do a video along the lines of that for a long time. You know, probably a year, maybe even a year and a half. And the reason I did, that I didn't, the reason I did is pretty obvious, because there's been so much more revelation since. So many more incredibly big and powerful pieces that I wanted to do another type of here's the motherlode of everything that's been revealed. But every time I went to think about it, every time I considered it, my mind just started to melt. Circuits were fizzing, and I was like, how am I going to start? How do I even start? There's just too much. And so last night, out of the blue, of course, right? We'll call it spirit led. I'm in the garage here and I'm praying. And suddenly I have this idea and I say, wait a second, I know what I can do. I can go from Genesis to Revelation, and I'll just go book by book and not go into the detail of everything, not even go into every book, but touch on, verbalize in snippets some of these revelations that we've had, these incredible connections and revelations that have revealed the beginning of Genesis to the end of Revelation. And some of them we'll just touch on and mention. Others will make more of a point of talking and going into. And then we'll mention but skip over others. And I thought, man, that would make it so much easier. Just start from the first book and go right through to the end, to the last book. And like I said, we're not going to go into all the detail, because if we went into all the detail, it would be like an extra long weekend, 8 hours, 10 hours a day of just bang, 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 bang. So we're not going to do that, but we're going to touch on some incredible points and cover the last like 4.5 years of this ministry, of these revelations that have taken place. It's amazing. And I think it's a very good way to go about doing it. And so anybody that's new in the ministry, I always recommend that you come to this video first, this playlist, the Revealed End Time Study Note Series.
Blessings.
It starts with this video right here. It's an intro, okay? The first two are the simplest intros, and it's who the Gospels are speaking to. And as much as we're going through this and we get to the point from Genesis and we get to the Gospels, we'll touch a bit on this. But if you really want to understand where this is all coming from, how this all came to be, you really might want to pause this video and watch these two right here first. This one right here is the revelation that started it all. It was when I realized something was happening. When I realized on September 8th that something had happened, and I was beginning to understand something that wasn't seen properly before. And everything changed. And that brought about this first video intro, which is the revelation of who the Gospels are speaking to. You will come to understand that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, within them, there's all these things that appear to be contradictions. Stories that are similar in 3 or 2 of them, or spoken in one but not in the others. There's reasons for it, and it's not just to give a perspective of Mark's perspective, Luke's perspective, Matthew's perspective. You can see it like that. It could be taught like that as the churches have done it, but that is looking in the eyes of the is, not in the is to come. And the reason for that is because it's clear that some of the stories cannot be explained by simply saying a perspective. Some of them are crystal clear, different stories. Crystal clear. One of them sees two guys, another one sees one guy. That's not just a perspective. That's clearly something different going on. Well, that type of thing is revealed in this intro video. You're going to come to understand that Luke is speaking to the bride of Christ, that Mark is speaking to the sleeping church, which is the house of Israel, which is the Gentiles grafted in with the house of Israel. It's called the world. Okay? The whole world right now is the house of Israel, if you will. Okay? Because they've mixed in with the Gentiles, the 10 tribes from the north. They mixed with the world. And Judah is Matthew. Matthew is the house of Judah. Matthew is to the Jews. And what happens is when you realize this, you say, oh my goodness. Well, how does this line up with a 7-year tribulation understanding? It doesn't. And that's what you're going to understand when you come to the second intro video, is you'll realize that Mark's discourse is not Matthew's discourse. The slight variations and differences and somewhat very different parts in it is because they're completely separate period of time. One is seals in Mark, one is trumpets for Matthew. Luke's is a very short period of time. It's amazing. And when you start to understand this, you're going to want to watch this third video called It's All Because of Matthew. You'll understand that how this all got missed is because our entire life, for hundreds of years, from the seminaries and everything, we've all been taught from this perspective, from this foundation of looking at everything from the Gospel of Matthew's view, unbeknownst to the world. Now, many scholars, many pastors, many in the seminary, they know that Matthew is written from a Jewish perspective. Okay? It's understood. But it was never fully understood who Mark and who Luke were speaking to. So what they did is they just took Matthew. Matthew's the first one. Let's just go from Matthew and build the rest around to add to Matthew. Unfortunately, you can't do that in the application of the end of days. You realize there's a reason for these differences in the Gospels. And when you do, all these things will blow you away. You will come to understand pre, mid, and post. All of these things are true. So for all of these reasons and so many more, I promise you, take the time to watch those videos. It will be some of the best studying, digging, and diligently seeking of the Lord you have ever done since you become a Christian. It will all begin to make sense. Do we know everything? Absolutely not. Do we know more than we've ever known before? Have we been revealed more about the end of days in this ministry than anywhere else that we know of? Absolutely. Have others had pieces and parts that helped, that maybe understood things 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and they put in parts? Absolutely. And when we came across those parts, we were able to understand them and pull things out and reveal how they tied in to the is to come. It's amazing. It is so amazing. All right. So that's what we're going to be going into today. And I want to start right off the bat by letting you guys know the website is back up and running. I guess it's not that it wasn't up and running. It's that we lost all of the videos. So we've got, 375 or something videos on the website. When you clicked on them, they were lost. We've got a beautiful, our brother Jimmy who does our website. He set it up so every video, if anybody wants to download a video, anybody wants to keep a video, put it on USBs, save it for left behind people with your left behind things, there's a simple one-click download button. That's how easy it is. All right. It'll download to your laptop or your phone or whatever you want to keep it on or that you're downloading it from. Well, what had happened is that was gone. All of our videos said error and they were gone. So Jimmy figured out what to do, and we called the server place and the hosting place, and we were able to get everything restored a few days back. So there are still 2 videos missing and then today's video. So updates are about to be made. But wanted to let you know the website is back up and running. All the videos are available for everybody. And for anybody that's new, how I shared the intro videos. All right, you can go watch those intro videos, which of course I recommend you do. But what you can also do is you can get our book. You can download or read it. So you can get it in a free PDF from the website. Click here on the homepage. You can go actually to the book page on the website, and you can literally just read the book from the website. You can also download the audio of the book. How about that? Or you can buy the ebook or the paperback book from Amazon. So you got something to write in the margins and share with people and everything else. All right. Another thing you can do is you can come up to this menu box here and you can come to the forum. Okay. This forum is where we have, over 900 brothers and sisters in there now. And we're sharing news and events and all sorts of things going on in the world, seeking scripture, being diligent, uplifting each other, praying for each other, all sorts of things going on. So if you're looking for like-minded brothers and sisters to connect with around the world, and not only just online, we've got many brothers and sisters that have met through this ministry around the world and meet with each other and have coffees and lunches and dinners and all sorts of things. All right. So you can come and join us there as well. Now, we also have some more great news in this ministry, brothers and sisters. You guys remember this? This was the, I don't know, I guess the third video ago called This is the Year. We touched on this video a little bit. And the reason we touched on this video is because this guy tells his death and having gone to heaven. And it was shared in the forum, but I don't know that I had seen it. I maybe just in passing saw it and I didn't give it much thought. Because when it comes to dreams or visions or, death experiences, I like scripture. I like to be able to prove these things out and see these things with scripture. That it gives me more strength and more confidence and more understanding, but I don't dismiss these things. And so even though it was shared in the forum, I didn't catch it until one of our brothers, Michael Calhoun, shared it. He told me what time in the video, because it's 2 hours long. So he told me where to go in it and watch. And I went in to watch and I said, oh my goodness. Right? As you guys know, this guy was speaking the words that I've been saying for 4 years. That the reason there are scriptures that talk about pre and scriptures that talk about mid and scriptures that talk about post, and that there are 3 events, rapture type events, or a rapture and a return, is because they're all true. And when you understand that they're all true and you stop all the bickering within communities of seeking this revelation, and you understand that it's revealed in who the gospels are speaking to, everything changes. Well, guess what? This guy went to heaven. Jesus had told him many things that he had asked, but he couldn't come back with all the understanding. But one of the things that he came back and he was talking about, because this happened, I guess, in the 80s, he's sharing here with her that the rapture was part of it. Not the when. He didn't even mention how long it lasted. The Lord didn't say how long it was, which was, I was happy to hear he didn't say that. But what he said were the same words that I had spoken, which was that they're all 3 are true. We here in this ministry understand and know why all 3 are true. We've proven it. So what happened is I thought, man, let me see if I could reach out to her. This is her channel. So this is the video right here. Look at that, over 200,000 views. So she gets, most of her videos get thousands, even hundreds of thousands of views, some of them. And so I thought, man, would this ever be awesome if we could reach out to her and submit a request to be on her to do an interview on her channel. That would be awesome. Well, brothers and sisters, I reached out to let her know what happened in this video and what we know about it. And lo and behold, they got back in touch with me, and we had a talk. It was 2 hours long of a pre-interview where I just went through a bunch of the key pieces that we're talking about here today. We're going to go beyond those, but to talk about a lot of these key pieces. And she just was like, what? And so she would ask me about this. And we spoke about the gap creation and how long did I think it was. And we went into the pre, mid, post and the understanding of it and the 70 years and all of these things. And she just said, whoa, my brain is short circuiting, right? And so I tried to keep it as calm and cool as I could without giving too much, because I know how it can be overwhelming. Well, by the end of our conversation, she says, how's next Tuesday? So boom, right there on the spot, brothers and sisters, she booked us for next Tuesday, which is tomorrow. So tomorrow at noon, some of you guys are going to be watching this video while I'm going to be doing an interview for her channel right here, which could be the next video or within the next couple of videos that she'll post. Unfortunately, no, guys, it's not going to be a live one. We're going to do it one-on-one. She records them and then she edits them so that they could be cleaner and sharper and everything else. But I wanted to let you guys know, man, we are going to reach more brothers and sisters. And what an exciting time to be doing that as everything is coming to a head, right? As we see this all approaching, what better time than now? So awesome. So I'm so grateful for Jennifer for giving us this opportunity, and I can't wait for us to share it with everybody. All right. So prayers over the ministry for that one tomorrow, that everything goes well. So with that, let me share this again with you guys. This is just as I was going through this and I'm thinking about, the fact that we're going to, let me just get rid of that one. And thinking about the fact that, we're doing a rehash almost like from the beginning, and we're going to touch and talk on these things. It brought me to the video, as you guys all know, the very first video Ministry Revealed ever did. Now, the very first video was this Mark of the Beast video, and I did it in 2 parts. But it wasn't the video where I had this moment where it was like this aha moment. It was somewhere, it might have been this video if I remember correctly. One of these videos in here, I think this one, maybe this one, I can't remember now, was September 8th, 2017, where in the video, I said, I had seen something and I knew something was up, but I didn't really know at the time. So I said, guys, if there's anything that comes from this, I'll let you guys know. And from that moment, everything in this ministry changed and everything started to be revealed. All of these books started to open. It was awesome. But I want to share with you guys this because I know that the Spirit was working within me from the very first video, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time. And as you guys know, we've talked about it a lot recently with this Mark of the Beast video. Because as you guys know, in this video, this is part 1 and part 2, what had happened was I talk about, the usual things with the Mark of the Beast, but it got into the companies involved and the government agencies involved and the name changes and how they merged with the credit company and they merged with the health records company and they had the RFID tracking technology. They were also the ones with the PCR machines, and I was talking about how they would use the PCR machines for testing people for viruses going in and out of countries, and it would seem like a good thing at first, but the question always had to be, why was the chip company who had merged with all these other companies working with government agencies the one who had the technology for testing for viruses using these PCR machines coming in and out of countries? That was the very first video in part 2 that I had ever done, brothers and sisters. So looking back, I absolutely know the Spirit was working even then when I was still unaware. But I want to share something with you guys that maybe many of you hadn't seen yet or hadn't heard. We all know that the 15th of Sivan, okay, the 14th of June, the Hebrew day goes from evening to evening, okay? The 14th of June, 2022 is the 15th of Sivan is the true 7th Sabbath in the Feast of Weeks. The 16th of Sivan is day 1 of the 50 days that you count afterwards. Okay, this is the 7th Sabbath, and this is when you number then 50 days. This is the beginning of this is the Feast of Weeks right here. Okay, then you count 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now I'm stopping there because, as you guys know, this first day may be the escape of the bride of Christ. Now I say maybe because we've seen some scriptures that show the bride of Christ may be gone at the beginning of the 50-day count, but we've also seen other scriptures, and I think more so give us the understanding that says after 7 days, which would be sometime after 7 on the 8th day, to be the escape of the bride of Christ, and when the Son of Man is here for 40 days. We know he's rejected. We know the world isn't ready. The sleeping church has no idea that the Son of Man is coming for 40 days. In all the chaos of the bride escaping, they're going to believe just like the Arabs, I mean the Muslims. They're going to say that he is the Antichrist. And Christians that were asleep that will have heard about it are going to think that he's the Antichrist. We know that he is not the Antichrist. It is the Son of Man coming for 40 days. And oh my goodness, how surprised are the church that is remaining going to be when he is gone after 40 days. They're going to say, I thought the Antichrist was here for longer than that. Right? They're going to be in for a big surprise. But this is why I'm bringing it up to you now. Because remember this video? The very first video I ever did, that I ever posted, I did a study on the video for 1 week. I studied for 7 days, and I talk about it in the video that I studied for a week putting this together and digging into all of this. Look at when I did the video, guys. June 16th, 2017. That was part 1. Part 2, I did and posted it on June 17th of 2017. Do you want to know why this is significant? See this right here? This is the end. This is 7 days, right? To the 7th day, and this is to the 8th day. Watch this. And it was June 16th and 17th. But when was it? In 2017. June 2017, the 16th and the 17th of June, part 1 of the video and part 2 played the next day were what? The 22nd and 23rd of Sivan. The day of my very first video, from part 1 into part 2, will equal the date of the escape exactly 5 years later. And do you want to know why this is even more wild? You want to see how crazy wild this is? The exact day, 5 years to the date. Do you want to see something even crazier? Watch this. What year was 2016 into 2017? Going from fall feast to fall feast, right? Going from Tishri to Tishri like the Jews do? Look at this. It was the year 577. What do we get? To 2022 at the escape, it will have been exactly 5 years. And what was it the revelation of? 777. What? In the year 577 began the revelation that would be 5 years in the making, from start to finish. And the revelation of it was 777. You say, what do I mean 777? I thought you said the end of days was 7 years of seals and 7 years of trumpets. I did, you're right. But do you know where it started? There was 7 what's called easy years. When Jacob worked expecting Rachel but got Leah, these are the 7 years that flew by that felt like days. The end of days revelation is 777. 7 for a total of 21 years, and eternity will be like 21,000 years and will end and be eternity, at the 22nd thousandth year. Because as you guys know, we've shared about all this being a fractal, right? Well, you see how awesome that is? In the year 577 began the 5-year revelation of 777. What? And it's to the exact date. To the exact Hebrew date. You know what else is cool in all this? Remember the blood moons? Passover from the 14th to the 15th. Tabernacles, Sukkot from the 2014 to 2015. Do you know what this was, brothers and sisters? From the fall of 2014 to the fall of 2015? You could say, oh, but this was Nisan. One is Tishri, one is Nisan. One is Nisan, one is Tishri, one is Nisan, one is Tishri. From 14 into 15. Do you know what year this was, though? It was a Shemitah year, guys. Watch this. It was a Shemitah year. Just like our cycle shows. Look at the Shemitah years in Israel right here. 2014, 2015. Fall feast to fall feasts. These are the types of things we've got in our charts that prove this out as well. Right? Where is it? 2014 to 2015. Bang. Right here. Shemitah year. Sabbath year right there. Which means, just as we confirmed before, that means we are currently in a Shemitah year. What else did it show? As you guys know, 1951 to 1952. When did they come into the land? 1948 to 1949. Then 1949 to 1950. 1950 to 1951. When was the Shemitah year? 1951 to 1952. Which means what? As you guys know, 3 years they couldn't take from the land. The 4th year was to the Lord. Which means in the 4th year of this Shemitah cycle, it would be given to the Lord. And then what? Then their 70 years would begin. It was from the 5th year, according to Leviticus 19, that their 70 would begin. And look at what it equals. Bang. What does their history tell us? The same thing. The first Shemitah year in the modern state of Israel was 1951 to 1952. What is it this year? Bang. The current Shemitah year is 2021 to 2022. In the Hebrew year 5782. The next Shemitah cycle isn't until 2020 to 2028 to 2029. And you see, if churchgoers, or not just churchgoers, people that study end times, that only understand a 7-year tribulation period, should all be looking at this for the beginning of the 7 years of tribulation. And why is that? Because they all study from Matthew, thinking that it's everybody goes at the rapture of the great multitude before the 7 years of Jacob's trouble. So everybody should be looking to this as the 7th year, which means it's not until after this 7th Jubilee year that year 1, meaning from Tishri of 2029 to Tishri of 2030, is year 1. Do you see why I said it's more exciting when you understand that the truth is 14 years? And our cycles on our charts prove out the same thing? And the Bible told us the same thing? It means we go sooner, brothers and sisters, than later. Unless, of course, you're watching this, but you're actually still asleep. Then you may have to hang out a little longer. Don't want any of that to happen, do we? I just wanted to share that with you guys because this was, to the day, from the 22nd to the 23rd, this is 7 days. And I said that I studied it for 7 days And then I did the video on this date, and the second video was on this date, which would be the 8th day. And exactly 5 years later, and it's the revelation of 777. Man, see, it's these types of things that just make you go, what? It's pretty wild. So, you want to know what comes with this too, guys? We haven't spent too much time in Ecclesiastes, but we've shared on some of these things before, right? We've talked about this a lot lately. You know, the things that have been are the things which shall be, and the things, and that which is the thing that shall be done as well. So both the was of the Old Testament, both the is of the New Testament will both play out in the is to come of the end of days. And it was very powerful because we know that's all fit in to 2 sets of 7 years. But you know what comes with this, guys? And this is something I was touching on earlier. This is my 3rd attempt on the video. The first one, I was glitchy. The second one, the neighbor started a blower or something like that with the leaves. So I'm like, oh, so I had to start all over again. It was just, I couldn't take it. And so this is the third one. So I don't think I've said it already, or that I'm repeating it, but in case I am, well, you'll know why. And that is that, you know, this, it's a struggle sometimes, right? It's a struggle, and it's been a struggle for a little while. And it's not so much a struggle that, like we said earlier, it's not so much as this struggle of the joy of knowing, but it's what do we do with ourselves? What do we do with our life? We still got to live our life. We still have to provide. We still have to work. We still have to do things as we diligently continue to seek Him. We have to continue to do these things. But having the knowledge, having this revelation and this understanding along the way can get really weighty sometimes, can it? Well, guys, I want you to know that we're all in good company because it's exactly what Scripture told us. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. You see? Increases wisdom and knowledge of what? Of Him, of Scripture. It told you what it was up here. You know, what was shall be, what is shall be. Having this revelation, having this understanding, it is such a joy. It is so exciting. It just makes you like, well, you can't believe it sometimes. But at the same time, you say, man, nobody wants to hear it. I thought me and my brother, I thought we had the same spirit in us. If we have the same spirit, why doesn't his spirit want to go and do a study of Scripture so that he could see who the Gospels are speaking to? Why doesn't anybody want to hear that, hey, wouldn't you rather understand that it's 14 than 7, so that means you actually go sooner? That means that everybody who's left isn't just left to go through tribulation without hope. It means that pre, mid, and post are all true. See, increasing in these things brings sorrow. It brings grief because all we want is for everybody to just listen, just pay attention to a little bit. Spend 30 minutes of your life and see how incredibly awesome this is. Especially in the time we're living in right now. It is always salvation number one. Salvation, salvation, salvation. Coming to the truth and believing and repenting, being baptized. But then you need to get some meat. It's time to get meat on the bones right away. Because there's not enough time left. There's not enough time to say, well, I'll keep going in the milk and the breast milk, and I'll just stick with that in church for the next 5 years or 10 years. There's no time for that. I believe this is the second most important thing. After salvation, it's growing and drawing closer to Him so that we can understand Him better and help share that understanding with those who will listen. And grief and sorrow come with it, as so many of you guys know, right? Man, but it's exciting. And we're going to share some of that exciting now too. We were already touching on some of them, of course, but we're going to touch on many, many more. This is something, you know, it was kind of strange starting right off in Genesis, but for me, it just made it the simplest thing to do, right? The easiest thing in going book by book. But this piece here in Genesis 1, I remember, man, there's a sister. In fact, I'm going to be talking with her probably Wednesday or Thursday. A sister, Denise, who lives in Canada, west of me, actually. And we had this conversation about 3 years ago now. I think it was 3 years ago. And she was sharing with me some things in Genesis. And I kept thinking, man, it's not jiving where she was thinking it was supposed to go. And so as she was explaining and as I was listening, and I'm like, it suddenly dawned on me. And she had been sharing things like in Genesis 14 and this time of the Lot portion and when Melchizedek comes on the scene and I said, wait a second. It suddenly dawned on me as she was talking that if we go to Genesis 1 and we see in the beginning, and we go to John chapter 1 and we already know that John in the Revelation, John was already an open book that we had, right? The 21 chapters of John, within each chapter is a typology of events within the end of days, right? From 7 and 8. And I said, well, wait a second. Genesis 1 had in the beginning, John 1 has in the beginning. John 7 going into John 8, right at the beginning of John 8, the Gentile woman who was caught in adultery, like the Gentile bride who's referred to as the adulteress, is standing before him, right? Like the Gentile bride is now standing before him. He's bent over on one knee, writing in the sand, and he looks up and everybody else is left, and it's just him bent down looking up at his bride. And then we go into I went into Genesis 7, going into Genesis 8, and I said, oh my goodness, Genesis 7 going into 8 is the same type of thing. We see in Genesis chapter 7 that it talks about yet 7 days, and then it says, and after 7 days. So that would be considered the typology of days as years. And so we had this 7 years as they were about to come. And then once these 7 years come to an end, the 40 days of getting into the ark and the doors being shut are about to start in the 7th year. And in the 8th year in the typology, the 40 days come to an end right at the beginning. The raven is sent out, then the dove, and then what did we have? Yet 7 more days, then the dove again, then the dove goes back, and then 7 more days. We had 7, 7, 7. And we realized, oh man, this is all connected like John. So we were able to see that Genesis chapter 1 for 21 chapters had a typology playing out in it, just like John's gospel of 21 chapters. We even got to, like we said, Genesis 14. And in Genesis 14, we saw how it's the rescue of Lot. It even says that for 13 years, they rebelled in the 13th year. They served for 12, rebelled in the 14th year. When we come to the chart, what do we see? 13 years, then they rebelled. And then the 14th year, when we come to Genesis, look where it is. It's the end of seals. Then they rebel against them. And then the 14th year, who comes? This is when the Lord comes on heavenly Mount Zion. When Yeshua comes as Joshua, the high priest. And just all of these things started to connect. And it got incredible. It got more incredible and more incredible. We get to Genesis chapter 21, and we get the birth of Isaac. In the birth of Isaac, in chapter 21, when it says now Abraham had just turned 100 years old. What did we get from the revelation of this? Well, we also know in Genesis 16 that Abraham was 86 years old when he had Ishmael, who is the typology of the Arabs. And then Isaac comes along after 13 years at the 14th year. What do we see? Who comes along at the beginning like Ishmael? The Arab. The raven comes at the beginning of the 14 years, right before the beginning of it. And what do we see? 13 years. What happened after the 13th? God makes a covenant with Abraham when Abraham is 99 years old. And it says, and Ishmael is 13. And then what happens? Bang. As he turns 100 in that 14th year, Isaac is born. What happens in the end of days after the 13th year when this covenant is renewed right here at the end? What happens? The Lord is here, feet down on the Mount of Olives. So not only did it reflect in his story of his two sons and his age, but the fact that it ended in Genesis chapter 21 with the birth of Isaac was also the exact same typology of these chapters to years and events taking place. We even recently spoke about how being chapter 8, the beginning of the 14 years, and how chapter 8 we saw the 7 and the 7, the typology of 7 years and 7 years to come. How when it was all over, you find out that Abraham, Noah was what? Noah was 601 years old when it's over. Well, when the Lord returns feet down on the Mount of Olives, it will have been 6,000 years old. And when that final year is fulfilled, it will be 6,001. Just like the story of Noah. I mean, you want to talk about an Isaiah 28, here a little, there a little. All of these pieces, but there's no way to grasp these things without starting at the beginning and understanding the Gospels. When you understand who the Gospels are speaking to, when you begin to understand the revelation of the 7 and 7, and this mysterious short portion of time for Luke, but really that it's actually a 7-year period that's been playing out. But it's been easy, right? And what I mean by easy doesn't mean everybody's life was easy. It means that the Lord was just so in love to create. He was so in love to create that to him it flew by like days. So when we come and see this gap creation, which was really recently revealed to us, we realize that in these two verses is this mystery of the gap creation. Well, to us, I mean, I had never seen that before in my life. But as it started to make sense, you say, well, how did it make sense? Well, again, it made sense because of something we found in Genesis. Genesis was power-packed for us, guys, because if you remember, it's all about the story of Jacob. Jacob saw Rachel and he went, whoa, she's gorgeous. I want her. But she had another sister, the older one, named Leah. And so what happened is, of course, Jacob says he's going to work 7 years. No problem. I'll work 7 years for her. And what does it say? In Genesis 29, verse 20, it says, they seemed unto him but a few days for the love that he had for her. But what was it? It wasn't really a few days. It was 7 years. But he was so excited to get her that it didn't matter how long it was. He was so in love, it just felt like days. But we all know the story. When he fulfilled those 7 days or those 7 years that felt like days, he ended up getting the older one, which is the one he didn't want. He wanted the younger one, but God's ways is you can't have the younger one before you have the older one. Which we revealed here was just like the bride of Christ. Jesus never came for the Gentile bride. He came for his Rachel, but he's getting Leah first. Because we came to understand that when Christ came the first time, okay, when he came the first time in the creation of it all, he created all these things in joy and in excitement in all of it. And this group was the group that what? Where the Spirit of God was over the face of the waters. And this revelation of the Spirit of God over the waters also refer to people. Now, am I saying that there were people in this creation? No, it was the spirit realm. Okay, they were all with the Spirit of God. Well, we came to find out that just like Jacob, a short period of time, what appeared to be a short period of time, a mysterious portion of time, a 7 year or a 7,000 year, or to the Lord God 7 days, flew by because of his joy and his excitement in the creating of it. But we come to find out that those who have the Spirit of God in them is given to us here in Romans 8. Those that have the Spirit of God in them, it says in Romans 8:14, it starts, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. Well, what do we know about the sons of God? Some of the sons of God fell, didn't they? But the majority did not. So we have a typology here. We have a group here being spoken of in Romans who have the Spirit of God in them, just like the gap creation in the beginning, who are the sons of God. And then it goes on to say in Romans 8, for you have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. You know what's pretty cool about this? Whereby we cry, Abba, Father. You see what number it is? G5. What was part of this beginning of it, right? 5777. What am I talking to you about? The revelation of the first 7 that began with those with the Spirit of God, which means the Luke group, the bride of Christ group being taken at the beginning is the typology of those in this gap creation of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. And what do we cry? Abba, Father. What number is it? 5. 5 of the first of the 3 sevens. And what does this group get? It says, the Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. You understand how powerful that is? If so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. You see that? Having understanding, having knowledge and understanding and wisdom of these things, and this is to come, of the Lord, and living out these things and trying to share it with others. We're going to have some suffering. This is what we were talking about earlier from Ecclesiastes 1:18. There's going to be some suffering. There's going to be knowing and seeking and being diligent as one who has the Spirit of God in them. So again, so much is being given to us in Genesis. And then what do we see? Well, then the second group starts. This is the second group. Now it says, and then he became light. God said, let there be light, and there was light. We know who this light was. This light was, of course, Christ. Okay? And we came to this revelation. We got this understanding within all of this just in the first few verses of Genesis. And then what happens? Now it's the conversation of days. Day 1, day 2, day 3, 4, 5, 6. We see what happened in day 6, and it was the creation of these males and females. Let us make them in our image. We know this is the group that got corrupted. This was a group of beings created in light. But we also know that there was somebody in this image of light who fell with another group who corrupted this image in the likeness of light that they were created in. This image of light that corrupted this group was because of Lucifer, which we've just recently gotten more clarity on, didn't we? In Isaiah chapter 6. Nope. And there was a couple spots, not Isaiah. In Psalms chapter 80 is one of the places. So see, now we can touch in Psalms. And it had to do with the cherub. Okay? Thou that dwelleth between the cherub shine forth. So this is talking about Jesus, how he dwells in the midst of the cherub. And we know what happened with this cherub, don't we? This cherub was the one that thought himself so great and so grand that he ended up falling, right? Or is it in Ezekiel 28? I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We just covered it in the last video. But it's just to connect to that portion of the beginning. See, so we know that this brightness of this one that fell, you see? And they shall defile thy brightness. Why this brightness? Who is he that he had this brightness? Well, he was a cherub. He was the anointed cherub. And this anointed cherub who had this brightness was because he was with this creation group back in chapter 1 of Genesis. This cherub was Lucifer. We came to find out that the seraphim is actually Satan, proving that Lucifer and Satan were not the same character, nor was their time at the same portion. But Satan, who is the seraphim, was above. He is the powerful one above the cherub as well. So it shows that there were different levels of these beings that fell. And as we went through this and we saw Genesis going into the days, day and night, we came to understand that this group in the sixth day that was created, that got corrupted, is just the same reference as Rachel. Meaning, as we know, Christ said, I came not but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Not of Judah. Not for the Gentiles. Remember the Gentile woman went to him, said, oh, crumbs, those are just for the dogs. Right? And she says, oh, well, dogs will even eat the crumbs that come from their master's table. And then he said, fine, you're healed. Right? He came for this group. This was the group that Christ came for. The first group was the Spirit group. Those who have the Spirit of God. Don't you find it interesting that we're sharing and revealing that those who are going first at the pre-trib escape of the bride of Christ are the same group found in verse 2 of Genesis 1 that Romans 8 said are the heirs with Christ, that have the Spirit of God in them? When did the Spirit get released? You see, when did the Spirit come? You see, guys, this is why it's so exciting. We are going at this time of the Feast of Weeks. This is the bride of Christ. But you see, Christ, this is the whole point. When Christ came, he didn't come to save those who were already saved. He didn't come for those, who were already prepared. He came for the lost. When did they first become lost? All the way back to his first creation of them. When Lucifer and those with him corrupted these light beings. It's so powerful. And we understood in all of this that the first two verses that are this mysterious, that had been this mysterious gap portion of time, actually relate to a 7,000 year typology of time. And it was through Jacob's story and the revelation of 777 that proved it out. And then you say, well, what about these? These are the creation of 7 days. Well, we've shown that these 7 days are created as days, as thousands and thousands of days. And where did we get that? Well, now we went from all the way from Genesis, and we were able to go all the way down to 2 Peter 3. What happens when we go to 2 Peter 3, verse 8? We're told, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years. And what was the creation in Genesis chapter 1 there? 1 day, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. So as in a perspective of the realm of time, to us, every one of those days, which are a day to the Lord, would be 1,000 years to us. And then what happened? Then we went to Genesis chapter 2. And in Genesis chapter 2, we're now in the beginning of the thousands of years. And what did 2 Peter 3:8 tell us? 1,000 years is as a day. So a day is as 1,000, and then reverses it and says 1,000 is as a day. This revealed to us the connection of the 7 and 7 of the 14 years, just like Mark's group and Matthew's group, seals and trumpets. The days in Genesis 1 are the same typology of the group that Jesus came to save, who weren't ready, who were lost. You follow? And then we say, well, what about this creation then that takes place in Genesis 2 forward? Well, from the creation of Adam, we're now living in those thousands of years. From Adam's creation to his fall, and then to Christ, and then to the end of 6,000 years, we are currently living in the years as thousands, which to the Lord God would be as days. So in the days creation and in the thousands that we're in, each of them to the Lord is 7 days and 7 days. To us, it would be 7,000 and 7,000. What is it? 14. 14. It is the revelation of the end of days, 7 of seals and 7 of trumpets. What was the mysterious part? Just like you see all blank here, because there is no tribulation. There is no tribulation for Luke's group. They're taken out before the tribulation. It's fascinating. It's so fascinating. And what happened? In the 6 days, on the 7th, he rested. What happens on the 7th day, or the 7,000th of seals, right? Well, really the 7th year, I should say, of seals. The Lord has returned on heavenly Mount Zion. The video I did when I talked about it recently too. The video I did about seeing when the Lord comes on heavenly Mount Zion, and at the end of chapter 6, at the end of the 6th seal, that video was almost 4 years ago, guys. I believe it was May of 2018. Wild. That one really floored me. Okay, so what is it? Well, he's here for that 7th year. Then what? Then you've got trumpets taking place, the 3.5, then the 2.5. At the end of the 13th year, the Lord returns to fulfill the 14th year. So he's here for a bit, right? He comes at the end of the 6th. He fulfills this 7th year. They're rebuilding the city and the streets and the temple, and the 144,000 are out doing their work during the first half of trumpets. Then Satan is cast down. 2.5 years of absolute craziness during the second half of trumpets, and then bang, the Lord cleans everything up in the final year when he returns feet down. What did we get in the days? We got 6 days. We got 6 days and the 7th rest. Then we got 6,000 years, and it'll be the 7,000th rest. What do we get in the end of days? 6 years and the 7th, the Lord has returned. 6 years and the 7th, the Lord has returned. Once and for all, feet down on the Mount of Olives. Over and over and over, it continues to replay itself. That was the video we did called A Fractal. And then we were just talking about this, right? Just like the days of Noah. What did we come to understand about the days of Noah? There were 2 things about the days of Noah, wasn't there? We can take it all the way back and go into the Gospels, where we were in Luke chapter 17. And in Luke 17, we saw right here, starting in verse 24, he's telling them prophecy about the coming of the kingdom. And they're asking, what's it going to be like? And he says, it'll be as lightning from one end of heaven unto other, when the Son of Man shall come in his day. But then he says, but first must he suffer many things and be rejected of this generation. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. So this one's talking about him being here as days. This one's saying him in his day, which is when he returns as lightning from one end to the other. So clearly this was talking about something different. And what are these days of Noah, and what do they relate to until they get into the ark and the door is shut? Well, they relate to 40 days. This was part of course, of the revelation of understanding that the Lord is coming for 40 days at the beginning of everything. We also got that, of course, from the revelation of understanding the differences within the Gospels. That in Luke chapter 11, about the story of Jonah, he said he would be as Jonah was for 40 days as a warning. Well, Christ never fulfilled that when he resurrected. He didn't go around being a warning for 40 days. In Mark, with the story of Jonah, I think it's chapter 8, if I remember correctly, he gives no warning. And he says, you get no sign, and he left. He got in the ship and he left. And then we go to Matthew, maybe Matthew 12 or something like that. In Matthew, he says, it will be as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Well, Christ was not 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth at his crucifixion. It was only a day and a half approximately in the grave, right? Being dead. So these things were prophetic. They haven't been fulfilled. And when we understood this one with Genesis and this portion with Noah, we were able to take it all the way back to the story of the story of Noah in Genesis chapter 7. And we saw that it was for yet 7 days as years. And then it says in verse 10, and it came to pass after 7 days or years. And then you just get this in between stuff. You get the 40 days that it talks about, where the Lord shuts them in, and the 40 days then prevailed on the earth. We came to chapter 8, and we see the 40 days coming to an end, like the 40 days of the Son of Man. When the 40 days are over, bang, the raven goes out, then the dove, and then what did we see? Yet 7 other days, which would be like saying what? Chapter 1 was like the first 7 was at the end of the first easy 7. Now what? This is stayed yet 7 other days. This would be 7 days as the 7 years of seals. What happens after the 7 years of seals? In that 7th year, it's the plucked up. It's the rapture of the great multitude. And then it said, stayed yet 7 other days. And these 7 other days referred to us as 7 more years, which would bring us to the end of trumpets. And when it comes to an end, at the end of that final 7, which is the end of the 14 portion of tribulation, or 21 with the easy that just flew by, when it's all over, it's not at the end of 20 or at the end of 13. This is at the end of 7, or at the end of the 14th of trumpets, the end of trumpets, the end of the 21, which means it's not the 600th year or the 6,000th year, but it's the 601st year, first day, first month, or the 6,000th and first year, first day, first month, the beginning of the millennial reign. This was amazing, because many of you guys will remember this, that maybe I would say even close to 3 years ago now. Wow. That for a while I was saying, we were struggling with this revelation of the 70th year of Israel. And man, we were, as far as I know, we were one of the only ones, if not the only one that I had heard of, where we were continuously trying to seek out the understanding of 70 years. Because if all of these pieces of scripture were telling us about 70 years, and 70 had come and gone by 2018 for Israel, something was amiss. Something was off. We needed to understand things. And you guys will remember, those of you that have been around for a while, that in this, I received one night, I was in prayer, I was in the shower, and I was saying, Lord, and I was all frustrated with the 70th year. And I said, how can this then be that it's 70 and still be 14? And I didn't hear an audible. It was nothing like that. I didn't get a vision or anything. It was my own thoughts. You know, when you have your self-talk and stuff in your head, or you're praying within your thoughts, right? The thought within my voice in my head, which you know what I'm getting at anyways. And so it was after 13, not 14. And I said, what? I thought to myself, where did that come from? I'm like, 13, not 14. And bam, in that moment, all like a 6 or so stories from scripture popped into my head. Like I said earlier, the story with Abraham. He had Ishmael, and then 13 years, then makes a covenant, boom, then Isaac shows up. We get the story of Jacob. He does 7 easy years. Okay, what happens after the 7 easy years? Then he does 7 for Rachel. After the 7 for Rachel, he does 6 for the cattle, so that when the story's over, 20 years have passed, and he makes a covenant with his father-in-law. We go to Daniel, and Daniel, it's 7 weeks as years, and then it's 3.5 of the city and the streets being rebuilt, and then cutting off because the prince that shall come and destroy the city and the temple and everything. That's 2.5 years. We understood that. We've talked about it. And then what happened? And then 1 week. That's the final year. And it turned out that all of these stories that we had been sharing, that we had covered, had revealed to us that when the Lord returns feet down at the end of 13 years to fulfill that final year, means the 6,000th year is when he returns. And when that final 14th year is fulfilled, it'll be the 6,001st year, first month, first day, just as the end of this final 7 equaled the 601st for Noah. Could you imagine all of this being revealed? How on earth, I've paused on some of these things over the years and just thought, how did I even come to, how did I get to there? How did this even, I shake my head and I just think, now guys, of course I know it's all the Spirit. It's being Spirit led. If we're not taking the time to diligently seek, then the Spirit's not going to give us anything, right? We've got to be diligently seeking. But I'll tell you, in the diligently seeking, it's still, I think back and I could remember everything. Like I'm doing all this without notes. I just know it. I read these things and I know it and I understand and I know where it is. And it's only been 4.5 years of doing this. No schooling, no nothing. And so I know it's Spirit led, but when you think back, you're like, but how did that even relate to get me to there? And to see what you guys are finding as well, and how you guys are relating this and finding this and sharing these things with me, and even more is opening up because you have the keys. It's like, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. All right. We shared in Genesis 10, right? What did Genesis 10 equal? The time of when the Antichrist would step forward, right? About 2.5 years after tribulation begins. And what do we see? Nimrod, and they want to build the Tower of Babel. He is an Antichrist character. He is an Antichrist, not a Satan character. He is an Antichrist, Lucifer character. That's his typology. When we were back in Genesis chapter 2 and we were saying, when Satan then comes in and Satan corrupts it, we saw that Satan, when he comes in, right, this serpent we talked about in the last video, or the second last, whichever it was, that this serpent, this snake type, we know that this is Satan. It's not Lucifer. Lucifer was over the light. Satan was in this portion trying to get rid of God's people. Right? trying to corrupt it from the beginning, just as Lucifer corrupted the other group. It's incredible. Who is the serpent? Who is Satan? He was a seraphim. All right? That's what we were sharing a moment ago. What was the seraphim in Isaiah 6? Isaiah 6 was the seraphim that was what? Above it. Okay? I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim. Right? Who wants to be above the Father? Satan does. Satan is the seraphim. Okay? The serpent. And so who was the one in Genesis that corrupted the creation in the thousands that we're in right now? Which would be like what? Which would be like the third set, right? This would be the first creation, right? The gap theory. This would be the creation of the days that are as thousands, which is the mark group, the light group that Christ had created that got corrupted by Lucifer. That is the typology of the Antichrist. And then you have this third seven, this third thousands as days to the Lord, but the thousands that we would be in the typology living in. And who corrupted it? Satan. Lucifer corrupted this one. The Antichrist corrupts this one. Who comes and corrupts this one? The serpent in the garden, who is Satan. And who's coming to corrupt this one? Satan, when he's being kicked out once and for all and cast down to heaven at mid-trumpets. And we can prove this as well by going to where? We can go all the way to Revelation chapter 16. We can go from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and we saw the proof of it right there in the wording. The dragon was cast out. So what happened? In Revelation 16:13, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon. That's Satan, right? Come out of the mouth of the dragon. See, the serpent. Come out of the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet. There are 3. And for there to be 3 must mean that Antichrist, false prophet, and Satan are 3 different people. You see? And that's the revelation we get all the way back. All the way back. What else can we go into in Genesis? Man, it's just, it's a wild, wild ride going into all these things. I mean, maybe we need to move on from Genesis, but you see, there is so much given to us in all of these revelations. We can do a weekend just going into Genesis and the revelation of it in the end of days. It's just beautiful. What else do we have? Oh, how about this? Remember, we've talked about Exodus, right? And this was something we've recently talked about with the birth of Moses. Moses is a typology also of John the Baptist, right? He comes from what? From parents that are Levites. What was John's parents, right? John's parents were from Levites as well. His father served in the temple. And so we talked about all of this typology because we realized recently that the revelation of Moses in the was, his typology in this is to come, is the portion over seals. And it's a very fascinating thing because his typology over seals is that he brought them into the wilderness, right? They had to flee and they got to the wilderness. Okay? It starts off first like the escape. It starts off first like the typology of the ark and going in the 3rd month of the year. Moses was born in the month of Adar. 3 months later would be the month of Sivan, just like we're talking about for June of this year. And we see that his mother made an ark and endowed it and slimed it with pitch. Just like a typology of the ark being in the 3rd month at Sivan before the 40 days begin. And him being put in it. So we have this typology of John the Baptist as well, because John the Baptist in Luke chapter 1 and being born first before Christ comes, and this typology that John was born at the time of the Feast of Weeks, just like the typology of us getting into the ark. And we have the John the Baptist, his 8th day circumcision, and his father declaring how the Lord had visited his people and taken out a people for his name, right? That he has visited and redeemed his people. And we also know when we go into Numbers, we went into Numbers chapter 20, and there was an incredible revelation here, which was when the Lord spoke to Moses and said that he was to speak to the rock so that it would bring forth water. What happens? Him and his brother, instead of speaking to the rock, they end up striking the rock twice. They put it upon themselves. Must we do it? And they strike the rock twice. What does that matter in relation to Moses? The relation is, for the one strike represented Moses over the house of Israel. And when Christ came the first time, he died for who? He died for the world, right? Yes, the bride and everybody has the opportunity to come in, but we know the Jews were blinded. So if the Jews were blinded in part, which was the greater part, and we know that he said he came but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, then what's the typology? The typology is that first strike, that first death and resurrection was to save the world, which was the first group that he created in the light of days. And in the typology, in the fractal vision of it, Moses then becomes the one causing that strike, if you will, that typology reference of striking the rock. And it was to bring about this salvation for those that were lost because of through the house of Israel. And the house of Israel, we came to understand, was they count everything from the fall feast, from Nisan. Remember we were showing this just a moment ago with the blood moons, Passover to Passover. The house of Israel goes from Nisan to Nisan. We came to realize that the house of Judah goes from Tishri to Tishri. So when Christ came the first time and he came for the house of Israel, which is called the world, he came and fulfilled the spring feasts in Nisan. When he comes this time, he's not coming for the house of Israel. Yes, he's going to come and save them, but he no longer has to die for them or sacrifice or anything like that, because he's already saved them. He just needs to allow them to go through seals so that they could wake up, so that they could realize it was all about him and not be so caught up in the things of this world. So seals is what they're going to have to experience as the last ditch effort to wake them all up. And so when do you think he's going to rescue them? You got it. He's going to rescue the great multitude rapture in the 7th year of seals at Passover, during the time of unleavened bread. But who's in the land of Israel right now? Not Israel, Judah. Israel is the world. The house of Israel is all mixed and blended in with the world. Those who are actually in the land of Judah, some of them are false, of course, but the overall, they are the house of Judah. And the house of Judah goes from what? Fall feasts to fall feasts. Okay? Tishri to Tishri. This was the blood moon. And this blood moon tetrad, what was the final one? The Sukkot to Sukkot. In the 7th year Shemitah. We're in the period of time where when seals begins, seals are to deal with the house of Israel, to bring them all in, to have them cry out by bringing about the most devastating time upon them, so that they will cry out to him and have no choice. That's the whole reason. But when he comes, he must remove Jerusalem. He must remove Judah from the land, because this time it's going to be against them. He's got to remove them so that when he comes after 7 years, he can build on the land that they've defiled since they've had Jerusalem for the past 50 plus years. It's incredible. And so what we ended up coming to see, guys, was something that was very powerful and very scary to say, was that the first strike that was the responsible portion of Moses was the portion over the house of Israel. And when we saw the typology of Moses's life, when he brings them into the wilderness, okay, it takes them what? It takes them about 2 months, okay, and this fleeing and this portion of tribulation that takes place, and he takes them into the wilderness. When the time of the wilderness comes to an end and they're about to go into the promised land, we know that Moses couldn't go. Then Joshua, who is the typology of Yeshua, took over, crossed over the Jordan, passed over the Jordan at Passover, and brought them into the land. That is the typology of the house of Israel being brought in the 7th year after being in the wilderness for 3.5 years. It's the exact correlation to Mark's discourse in Mark's discourse when it's talking about the abomination of desolation. This abomination of desolation, standing where it ought not. The word standing where it ought not also means to place. It could also mean to place where it ought not. Okay? We know that this is different than Matthew's. Matthew's says standing in the holy place. That's very different than Mark's. And what do we know about this? This is when they flee. When is this fleeing? It's the exact same typology of Matthew. I mean, of the story of Moses. When he came and then Pharaoh came after them and they fled into the wilderness. When will this fleeing into the wilderness take place? In about 2.5 years. Okay, once tribulation, the 14 years begins at Tishri this year, it'll be about 2.5 years, plus maybe a couple months, right, from when they start to flee to when they get into the wilderness. Just like what happened in the story of Moses. Moses, what? They leave at Passover, but it takes them about 2 months before they get there to the edge of the wilderness, or to the wilderness, and then the typology plays out as 40 years as 40 months. It's the portion of Moses's typology. And you want to know what's so fascinating? This is another great piece. Is when we realized a couple, 3 years ago, probably at least 3 years ago, that the difference in these discourses with Mark and Matthew and the abomination of desolation, Mark's to Matthew's, we realized that the book of Daniel also had 2 abominations in it. It had one in chapter 11 and it had one in chapter 12. Okay, go into it real quickly. Should be highlighted nicely. There we go. Okay, the abomination that maketh desolate is one, which is a seals one that we revealed. And then you have the abomination that maketh desolate in chapter 12, which is the mid-trumpets one. One relates to Mark's, one relates to Matthew's. Now, what was so fascinating about this? Why was it so fascinating in relation to its difference from Mark to Matthew's? Well, if the portion of Mark, as we've known for a long time, relates to the body, relates to the church still here enduring seals, relates to the Antichrist, mark of the beast, then placing something where it shouldn't be placed is a reference to the mark of the beast. And in the recent revelation of understanding the typology of Moses and being that that John the Baptist type, being that Elijah type, that both of them dying or taken up in a whirlwind before this Passover, this passing over the Jordan, before this portion where the Lord is here, and he's going to take that mantle forward. What was it with Moses? Moses had a temple, didn't he? Moses's temple was made of skins. Wasn't that an awesome revelation for those that have been around for a while? The temple of God that was portable, and it was made of flesh. It was made of skins. And what are we? Even during seals, what is the church that's going to be going through tribulation? They're still the temple of God. It's still the church age. You see? So what's going to happen? You have this movable temple covered in flesh. And who does it relate to? Moses, as Moses's group was in the wilderness. And what did they end up building? A temple to the Lord covered in skin that they could move. That was portable. What was the difference in Matthew's? Matthew's discourse says standing in the holy place. Why is that? Because during trumpets, as we all know, the first half of trumpets, they're going to be rebuilding the city and the streets and the temple. So when Satan is cast down, what ends up happening? They're going to stand in the temple, and he's going to declare himself to be God. Isn't that incredible? One is a temple as we are. One is what the Jews are expecting will come again, and it will be the first half of trumpets that it will be built. But it will all begin with them first being what? Removed from the land for 7 years. We'll get to that in a moment too. Let's fast forward now here into Exodus. What else did we come to understand in Exodus? We got some pretty awesome information, didn't we, in Exodus? We also came to understand that in the book of Exodus was a chapter to year revelation in it. Chapter 34 all the way to chapter 19, going into that Jubilee year. What did we understand? It went in reverse. So even though the story of Moses and coming out of the wilderness and understanding this whole concept in the was that took place went forward, right? 19, 20, 21 and went forward. The revelation of it in the end of days actually goes in reverse. And it's chapter 4 that is the beginning. It's chapter 4 that reveals the escape of the bride of Christ. It's chapter 34 verse 22 that says, and thou shalt observe the feast of weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest and of the ingathering at the year's end. And we recently had some incredible revelation about the year's end. That even though this word was used 4 times, they don't all mean the same year's end. And the revelation of it was in the fact that it had 2 definitions for the same word. That was such an incredible revelation that was just in the last 2-3 months or so. Maybe, yeah, in this past year, I think. And it was awesome when we finally understood that adding this one letter made a difference to whether it was the circuit of the sun or whether it was a period of time. One of the periods of time relates to the cycle of the year, the Tishri, okay? Like the Jews counting from Tishri to Tishri. Whereas the other one related to the circuit of the sun. And this one was the relation to the circuit of the sun. And in this revelation of the circuit of the sun, it revealed to us June. It revealed to us that it was going to be connected to the Feast of Weeks. And from the 7th to the 8th day at the circuit of the sun, which is the solstice, not the equinox, which is what has confused many people in this. What else did we see from things like this? The Feast of Ingathering. Look at the word. It's the 6/14, like June 14th, at the time of the ingathering of crops, which comes from the word 6/22, which is June 22nd, which is to remove, reward, to fetch, to take away. That was such an exciting revelation, because what does that equal this year? Look at it. June 22nd is the day we're talking about the escape at the circuit of the sun. And it started on June 14th from the 7th Sabbath of the Feast of Weeks. So many incredible things, guys. You know, another little piece here back in Genesis, as I think about it, looking at first fruits for us, you see, Christ was called the beginning. See, he was in the beginning. He was the Word, right? Then he became light. And then he became flesh. Now, was Christ Adam? I'm not saying Christ was the first Adam, like that Christ was Adam. I'm saying we know that Christ is a typology of Adam, because Christ is called the last, or some would say second, but he's called the last Adam. You see? And so when Christ came, he then became flesh. What did we see about this also in John chapter 1? As I backpedal a little bit to want to show this. John tells us in the beginning was the Word. What did in the beginning mean? It means Christ. So the very first verse says, in Christ God created. See, it was given to Christ to create it all for the Father. And Christ created everything. And then what did John tell us? John told us that he was made light. The same came for a witness, to bear witness of the light. Okay, Christ becomes light, and John wasn't that light, but he bore witness of that light. And then what? Then we come down and we see the third thing, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. See that? What is this? It's the first group. It's the second group. It's the third group. It's the gap, chapter 1. It's the light beings of chapter 2, of chapter 1 in the days. And it was the flesh beings from Adam forward in the typology of the time of flesh. All of these things proven out. And so when we come to understand these things, and we come to see things like these connections, this is one of those things again. How on earth do I ever come to the understanding that this story of Exodus going from 34 to 19 is actually the story not from 19 to 34, but in the end of days is going in reverse? Guys, I have no idea how I came to understand that. It's just as I read the storyline, I realized that these parts of wordings within them were actually storylines of future things, not as beginning things within the end of days. And as I started to look at it through those end time eyes that we talk about, it all lined up. Now, this is one of those things, I don't expect anybody to just take my word for it. And it's not an easy thing to see and to understand right away. But as you get good at this, as your eyes get really focused on the end time revelation of things, man, it's just going to blow you away. Then we were talking about how Israel or Jerusalem isn't now being occupied by Israel, by the house of Israel, because the house of Israel is the world, that it's occupied by Judah. Even the land of Israel, it's all occupied by Judah, right? It's controlled by Judah. So why is it this time that the Jews need to be removed first? Well, because remember, house of Israel already had their time. Now, as we said, the house of Israel is going to be woken up during seals and then rescued. The land of Jerusalem, which is the Lord God's land, they've been defiling in all sorts of ways of which part is not having allowed the land to rest on its Sabbaths from the beginning. And so if they haven't been obedient in these things, then the Lord's land is defiled. And so when he comes and all of this is to begin, he's got to start by removing them from the land. And we got some incredible revelation about this removing from the land. And it goes into Zechariah. We go into Zechariah chapter 1. And this brings us to what? The 70 years. Verse 12 says, you know, Lord, when are you going to have mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah? See, because they're his land. So the angel's like, hey, not the people. When are you going to get rid of the people so that your land can rest as it was supposed to? For 70 years they've been doing it, you see? So now the Lord says, no, now I'm jealous for my land, right? I'm jealous for Zion with a great jealousy. I was a little bit upset. Now I'm really displeased. And so what does he do? He brings about the affliction. When does it start? These 70 is the conversation. And then bang, when that 70 is over, according to Judah structure, according to Judah count, which is Tishri, which is the start of the 7th month, bang, the 14 years will begin, and it will start by them fleeing the land. How do we know this? How do we know this is the time that gets them out of the land? Well, when we came to chapter 7, we've been teaching on this for years. He comes into it and we've known it for years, but the problem was we could never discern the 70 years. And that's why we're going to go back in following this still from Genesis, Exodus. We're going to go into Leviticus. And that's where we finally late last year, actually no, a year and a half ago, received the revelation through a brother who had shared to go look at Leviticus 19 when it talks about when they come into the land. And when we got that, I thought that it related to the first 3 years. Okay. And then as soon as the 3 years were done, boom, we'd be taken to be with the Lord at the start of the 4th, right? Because as soon as 3 years are done, day 1, even though it's 3 years and 1 day, 3 years and 6 months, it's the 4th year. From day 1 after 3 is complete is the 4th year. So we are currently, this is how we can know that we're in the 70th year. And we'll go into that again in a moment. So what did we know that was so special about Zechariah chapter 7? Well, it was again one of those books that opened to us like Genesis did from 1 to 21, like John did from all of his chapters from 1 to 21. Zechariah was one of 2 books in the Bible that had 14 chapters. And it just so happened absolutely that the typology, the reference within these events, in these chapters, is the revelation of the end of days. And it's this perspective of Judah. All right, it's the perspective of Judah. And what do we see? In chapter 1, it said these 70 years, and then he brought the affliction. We came to Zechariah chapter 7, and it says everything in past tense. When you fasted, when you mourned, in the 5th and 7th month, those 70 years, everything's past tense. It says, when Jerusalem was inhabited and in prosperity. Well, they're right now in their true 70th, and they're in prosperity, and they're inhabiting the land and the plains to the south. This is all former, saying when they were doing that for 70 years. Wow. Do you understand how important it is that we had to continue to seek out the understanding of 70 years for Israel, for the land of Israel, for the Jews in the land? Because it's given to us everywhere. It was a necessity to continue to seek out and understand the truth of the 70 years. So what was this telling us? This was telling us that for 70 years, they had observed the 5th and the 7th month fasting and mourning. But where is the Lord God counting from? Well, we now know through the revelation of the Lord's feasts, Passover, Feast of Weeks, and Tabernacles. that it begins with the Feast of Weeks, that the first covenant he made with man was the Feast of Weeks, that Christ is called in the beginning, which is the ox, which is Taurus, which is the Feast of Weeks. So he's saying for 70 years you did these things, but guess what? You're not going to be able to do it anymore. See, the 5th and the 7th month, do you know what happens when we go into the 5th and 7th month? Watch this. Go to the 5th and 7th month. Where are we? And what happens? The 50 days to from the count, right? From the beginning of the 50-day count, 7 Sabbaths, then shall you number 50 days. That's the true count. You have the 40 days of the Son of Man in here that will end on the 31st of July. Then you have Pentecost, right? New wine. What happens at Pentecost, at new wine? The Holy Ghost of Acts 2.0. This group is the anointed group that will be working during seals as the disciples and working with the apostles that will be anointed probably around the beginning of the 50. And then what happens? Here it is. This compassing about and the attack of the 5th month, the 9th of Av. Then what? It said the 5th and the 7th month. 50 days later from the 9th of Av is the 29th of Elul to the 1st of Tishri. In history, which all of this is going to be a repeat just in modern times, 50 days later is the second attack, which is what this was telling us in the 7th month. So they were able to observe the 5th and the 7th month all these times, but not anymore. Now it comes to an end. What ends up happening when they're gone after this? 7 years. 7 years. So where does this take us? This takes us back to Leviticus. Now when we come into the Leviticus, what did we find out by going into Leviticus 19? We found out going in verse 23 and 24 that the Lord said, when you shall come into the land. We know that they came into the land as we showed earlier in 1948. And shall have planted all manner of trees for food, then you shall count the fruit thereof uncircumcised 3 years. This is why we were thinking it was last year. For 3 years it shall be uncircumcised, and you shall not eat thereof. They came into the land in 48, so from 48 to 49, 49 to 50, 50 to 51, 3 years. Then it said, in the 4th year, all the fruit thereof shall be holy to praise the Lord. So it's to the Lord to be praised. When was this 4th year? This 4th year would have been on a Shemitah cycle. It would have been 51 to 52. Isn't that fascinating? This was exactly what we showed. This is exactly what we showed, and it's exactly what it was when they came into the land. The first Shemitah year was 1951 to 1952, which proved that when the 4th year comes to an end on the Lord God's count, from the 5th year forward, it's theirs to eat. Which means from the new cycle that began, the new cycle of sevens began from 52 into 53, was when their 70 years began. Isn't that awesome? That means this right here, right now, is what we're talking about for June. Look at what it becomes. A celebration of thanksgiving for harvest. But you know what's so incredible about this? This isn't Rachel. This is Leah. Because we got the revelation of Rachel and Jacob with Leah and all of that, that the older has to go before the new. And when you understand the harvest cycles and the 2 wheat cycles, that there's winter wheat and spring wheat, The winter wheat is called the old wheat, and it goes first, and it goes at the time of the Feast of Weeks. The new wheat is the stuff that's planted in spring. The other one, the old wheat, was called winter wheat. The spring wheat is the one planted in the spring, and then they start to bring it in at around the fall feast, and it's not all brought in and used. It's not usable, the new wheat, until the second day of Passover, until the beginning of unleavened bread, which is why the Rachel group, the house of Israel, the rapture of the great multitude happens at Passover. The bride of Christ goes at the celebration of harvest of Thanksgiving. This celebration is the Feast of Weeks. It is the Lord's. So awesome. But what else do we know about this? What else do we know in this time? Well, we know that there's to observe their Sabbaths, that every 7th year the land was to rest, period. They weren't obedient to it. They did it in part, but they were disobedient. What were they supposed to do at the Jubilee? At the Jubilee, they were supposed to restore all things. They were supposed to forgive the debts, right? From when they came into the land and they had Jerusalem. They never did these things, or they partially did them with the land. And so what ends up happening for this? Well, the Lord told us that this was his land. Okay, he says it's my land. Look at this. The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. Jerusalem is the Lord God's land. And so what comes of this for them? Well, we were told what happens for their disobedience. Punishment. You see, but was it all foreordained? Was it all pre-understood? Absolutely. Of course, the Lord knows everything. He knows it from beginning to end. He's outside of time. He sees it all. He knows it all. But they played right into it, of course, because it was his plan. Why? Because while they're removed for those 7 years that you're going to see, it's so the land was able to rest, so that when he returns, he can build on it, because it has now had its rest. But in those 7, he had to finish up with the house of Israel, with the world. So knowing they would be disobedient, knowing they would be corrupted in that land, knowing that it was going to have to take its rest, listen to what it says. And if you, in Leviticus 26, verse 18, and if you will not yet for all this hearken unto me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. I will break your pride, the pride of your power. Verse 21, and if you walk contrary unto me and will not hearken unto me, I will bring 7 times more plagues upon you according to your sins. 7 times, you see, for the 7 years of disobedience. Verse 24, then will I also walk contrary unto you and will punish you yet 7 times for your sins. And I will bring a sword upon you that shall avenge the quarrel of my covenant. And when you are gathered together within your cities, I will send the pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of your enemies. You would think they would be aware that this is coming for them, but don't you? What are they reading from that they don't think this is coming for them? It's like the conversation. I don't know if I recently told you guys or I was talking to somebody else, but you see, the Jews, because Christians are all learning from the book of Matthew, and they only see 7 years of tribulation coming, they think the first 7 will be pretty easy, and it'll be the temple getting rebuilt before Antichrist, who they think is also Satan at the same time, steps in. So Jews don't think that an attack that will devastate them is coming upon them. They're heeding what Christians are saying to an extent, but knowing in their pride or thinking in their pride that they understand so much better, but they want to agree with the Christians, knowing that, hey, this temple is what's coming next. They have completely misunderstood. They have completely missed that Leviticus 26 is coming for them. That they must be removed from the land before the Lord God builds it, not them. Christians will tell you it's the Antichrist that's going to build it. No, it's not. The Jews know who's going to build it to an extent. They know the anointed who's coming. Right? We've taught on that recently as well. So 7 times he's going to chastise them. And you shall eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. I hate that part. Because you understand what this means? If this is about to come upon them, then that means this is about to come upon them. And it's so disgusting and revolting to think about. But why is he doing it? Because they walk contrary unto him. So he's going to remove this thing within your thoughts, this thing within your spirit that would not allow you to do such a thing. He's going to remove that and go contrary to them. That's why it's saying contrary. It's something they wouldn't do, that they wouldn't fathom. It's going to go contrary to everything they would have done. Terrible. See, look at what it says. Verse 33. And I will scatter you among the heathen and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate and your cities waste. See? Isn't that what Zechariah said? You were inhabiting the land. Everything was fine in the land. It's all great. Boom. They was this, was that, was prosperous. Now it's going to be desolate and waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths, you see? As long as it lieth desolate, and you be in your enemy's land, even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when you dwelt upon it. How much more clear does that have to be? It has to be connected to a time when they've had Jerusalem. It has to be connected to this portion that equals 70 for Israel as well. But that 70, the mystery had always been the 4 years. The 5th year, guys, began the 70 for which they could now eat of it. This is why we're so excited for now. This is why we're so on edge. This is why it gets so much more difficult at this time, knowing what we know and just trying to wake up other brothers and sisters. That's why I'm so excited for tomorrow. I'm so jacked, man, to go and to have this interview with Jennifer over at Deep Believer. I pray the Spirit of the Lord brings hundreds of thousands like some of those other videos. Could you imagine? At this time, boom. That would be so awesome. That is our prayer, right? Bring them, Spirit. Give them eyes. Give them ears. Let them hear and understand. We're coming up on 2 hours and I've only gone into numbers. I'm only getting to numbers. No, that's not going to work, is it? You see, it's just, I have such a tough time just saying, oh, here this is, here that is, here this is. You know, I'm always trying to give it with more detail. So we'll see how much longer this goes. And maybe in a future video, in order, meaning in the next one, I'll do another piece. And maybe in the next one, I'll do another piece. And it could be like a part 1, 2, 3 type thing going on. Because I think even in between, I don't know how long it will take for her to post the interview that we do. But I'm also going to share it on our channel here as well. So, all right. So now what happens when we come into numbers? Well, again, without spending a lot of time in numbers, we've had a couple of real fascinating pieces. And one of those pieces was this revelation. Now, when I say incredible, I mean so incredible that they almost without them, 2 of the biggest revelations could have never been understood. And one of them was Osee, whose name is Hosea. Okay? whose name is Hosea. Somebody pointed out to me the other day, because we were talking about 1984 and we were talking about 1954, and in 1954 was when America added in God we trust. And that was the money. Was it on the currency? No, it was in their Pledge of Allegiance or whatever it is, when they under God or whatever. However, I'm Canadian, sorry. So when you guys added it, it was 1954. All right, so that was pretty cool, because America is believed to be Ephraim, and Ossi, who is the tribe of Ephraim called the deliverer, and it was in his Hebrew number is 1954. That was pretty cool. But what we had come to understand was that one of the other books, out of the only two in the Bible, as I had mentioned earlier, Zechariah was one of them, but Hosea was the other. And we know in Hosea from Romans 8, 9, or 11, I think chapter 9, we know that Ossi, or Hosea, is to the Gentiles. And what was so powerful about that was that it says the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea, the Lord, that's the Father, said to Hosea, the deliverer, go take your wife of whoredoms, go get your Gentile bride. And it was very powerful, because when you go read about it in Romans, I think it's chapter 9. Let's go down and read it real quick. And what does he say? Starting in 24, 9:24. Even us, whom he hath called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles, as he saith also in Ossi, okay, Ossi, which means Hosea, I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her my beloved, which was not my beloved. See that? His beloved, which was not his beloved. The Gentile reference of Ossi, or Hosea, when? Look at this. The beginning to the time of the 14 years. And so why was this so exciting within Numbers? Because when all of this was playing and coming about, we understood that the bride of Christ was going to be taken before the 14 years began. There was this period above 14 years. And we know that it related to this 50-day count. And we got all of this revelation to Nun, you see, because Ossi's father was Nun. Nun is perpetuity. This is actually the Father. Okay, this is like Father God. To be continued, Nun, it's perpetuity, forever. And it was also what? Joshua's father. From this, we got the revelation, because Nun equals the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it was the revelation of 14 years, and Hosea, Ossi, being 14 chapters relating to the 14 years. And Nun is also not only the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is the reference within all of the count, it's also in the Hebrew numbers, it's number 50. So it was 1450. So when the 14 years are over, we know that it was the 50th Jubilee. But what happens before the 14 years begin? There's 50 days. So you had 50, 14, 50, and we got this revelation and this incredible count. And it was the one confirmation I received from the Lord, as many of you guys know. So it was an incredible thing. That was one of the first things, and it was so mind-boggling. And that was back in March of 2020. And the Lord had confirmed it through the Spirit. That was the one event I know was an absolute message from the Holy Spirit that was saying right on target. Because what does it mean? It means bullseye. It means the actual eye in Taurus. And it was such an incredible revelation. We've talked about it many times. Well, recently, what did we come to see? Well, we know that Osee or Hosea ends up getting his name changed to Joshua or Yeshua. So his name goes from Hosea to Yeshua. Well, we know as Hosea, he was the deliverer for the pre-trib escape. Well, at the rapture, he's going to be as Joshua, Yeshua. Okay, when Moses isn't able to pass over and Joshua is going to take over. And we realize that it was because of the tribe of Ephraim, right? This brought us to Jeremiah chapter 31, which had been a mystery to us for a long time, that in verse 8 told us that, verse 9, that it said that Ephraim is my firstborn. So if the father is saying that Ephraim is his firstborn, you're like, whoa, what? How is Ephraim his firstborn? Yet Jesus is supposed to be the tribe of Judah. Okay, well, he still has to fulfill. He still has to what? Ephraim means double portion. Okay, a double fruit, a double portion. And so we started to understand just more recently that what this all meant was that yes, as Hosea, he came to deliver the bride. The bride was delivered above the 14 years. But when he comes at the end of seals, he's coming as Joshua. And when he's as Joshua, he's going to fulfill his second portion, which is then trumpets as Yeshua, the head, the high priest over the 144,000. It's why we see in Revelation chapter 14, which is similar, isn't it? You go to Revelation chapter 14, and in the big picture, Revelation chapter 14, kind of like the 14th year. I'm not saying it's a chapters to years with Revelation, but there are a couple points within it that are lined up. And what do we see? Revelation chapter 14 to the 14th year. And in Revelation chapter 14, we see what? The Lamb standing on Mount Zion with the 144,000. Because why? He's as the high priest Joshua, serving as the second portion of Ephraim to fulfill the portion as the high priest for Judah. Remember what we said? Jesus fulfilled the house of Israel, the spring feasts, and he fulfilled it in his death and resurrection for the world, which is the house of Israel. He did it at the spring feasts. Well, guess what? He now needs to fulfill the fall feasts. But if Judah was blinded, they have to be made to see. And if you recall, in Numbers chapter 20, we covered how the first strike was Moses's that covered the portion for the house of Israel. But Aaron is the one responsible for that second strike. And that second strike revealed to us what so many pieces of scripture have shown us, that he must be struck again, that he is the reference is as the high priestly portion, for which Aaron wasn't high priestly portioned enough, which is why when Christ comes this time, as we saw in Revelation chapter 14, which equals the same time, is when Melchizedek shows up on the scene. When does Melchizedek show up on the scene to take over? He starts in the conversation in chapter 5 that he's coming, and then in chapter 7 of Hebrews, he's there in the typology, just as the equivalent of Genesis 14. In the book of Revelation, in chapter 14, when the Lamb is with the 144,000 in Mount Zion, on Mount Zion, he is the high priest in the replacement above Aaron. But he's going to have to pay for the house of Judah. He's going to have to pay a price for them. You know, we did a great story, a great revealing in the book of Jonah about this, that the story of Jonah also revealed the entirety of the end of days, going in reverse from chapter 4, 3, 2, 1. And he talks about how he said he would do it, right? He said, but I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. This was the typology of him going and being sacrificed again and being in the belly of the earth, being in the belly of the fish, for that typology then of 3 days and 3 nights, which showed us the revelation that Joshua, as Yeshua, as one of the anointed two, as the high priest, is one of the 2 witnesses who will be sacrificed, who will be in a battle and then be sacrificed, which is called again. Man, does this ever keep going, right? It's such a mind blower. I mean, I struggled for a long time. I knew this was coming, but it was a struggle. We've got a video called Again when I finally put it together, and there's even more since then that it absolutely is going to happen again. But did you see how the typology of Christ there in the wording, because he is the word, that in the story there of Jonah, he was saying, I said I would do it and I'll do it. Okay? He still has to rescue Judah because the Jews have been blinded. How are they going to be saved? How are they supposed to be saved with Christ's first coming if they were blinded? It would be impossible, wouldn't it? That's why Isaiah 6, when we see it, isn't that interesting? Isaiah 6 is about it starts with the seraphim, which is Satan. One of the seraphim that fell, which is Satan. Satan is over who? He was over that third portion, right? Over the flesh, over the Judah portion typology. And here he is in the typology as one of the seraphim. We know he was one of them, being above the throne, wanting to be above the throne of God. And what do we see that comes next? It's the story about how the Jews had to be made blind so that they didn't see who Christ was when he came the first time. Because had they seen, it would have been over for the house of Israel. They had to be blinded. And so knowing that they would defile themselves, knowing that they would defile the land, and it would be the portion of 7 years to bring in the house of Israel, he had to blind them so that they didn't get to jump the gun and get too far ahead of things, to allow them the time to bring in the house of Israel in his appointed time. So what ends up happening? Isaiah 6 starting in verse 8 says, also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And whom will go for us? Then said I, here I am, send me. We know that this is a typology of Christ, right? And it says, and he said, go and tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not. And see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert and be healed. This one is always blowing me away. That means if they weren't made fat and blinded, they probably would have understood Christ's coming and they would have been saved, and the whole storyline would have fallen apart. This is why it's so awesome. You know, our brother Ivan in the forum here in the ministry has posted some great things too, because when you take all this in, listen to what I've been teaching so far. This is stuff that is so powerful, that is such mysteries being revealed after mystery after mystery, after connection to revelation after connection to revelation. When you understand these things, you begin to see so much more of God's plan. All of it? Heck no. Not even a fraction of it, but more than we've ever understood in all the lifetimes so far. Absolutely. And when what you start to see is how everything is his plan. Not just whimsically saying, oh, of course. Well, we know it's all part of God's plan. No, it's all part of God's plan. You begin to actually see it. You read things like this and you say, oh my goodness. So the Jews were purposely blinded? So here, we're trying to save the Jews, and we want to save the Jews, and some of them, because they were blinded in part for the vast majority part, but some of them are being saved. But the ones that are being saved were meant to be saved, because their portion will be going with the bride. They are the thousands of thousands. You see, Jew and Gentile alike. That's that portion, but not the majority of them. It was meant for them to defile. It was meant that this would happen when they were in the land. It was meant that this would equal that in the end of days to bring about the end. They were meant to come in the land with 4 years left on the cycle, so that at the 5th, just like the law told them thousands of years ago in Leviticus, that when they came into the land, there would be 4 years left and their cycle of 70 would begin on the 5th year. So that in this defilement, when it all came to an end, it would leave the 7 years where they would be removed, where he would bring in the house of Israel, and then turn and come back and deal with the 7 years for them before it would be all over and it'd be the beginning of the millennial reign. All planned perfectly, of course. But to see the groups, to see that there was a portion that was meant to be blinded for Judah, the largest portion of Judah, that the portion of the church, the 90% of the church, was meant to be sleepy. They were purposed to be sleepy at this time. And those who are pre-trib, those who are that bride of Christ at the beginning, they were predestined, just as Romans tells us. It was predestined for that group, just as that creation in the Spirit of God in that gap portion. They were all predestined for that time. But now here's the problem. Does that mean we don't share with this person because they don't want to listen, they're in the sleeping church? No. Or we don't share it with Jews because they're predestined, they were made fat and blind on purpose? No. We still share it with everybody because nobody knows who the other is. You see how awesome that is? Do you know how awesome it is to understand these things? This is just incredible. He did this to them so we can come. This is why we're to pray for them, right? This is why when we go to Romans 11, you see, this is why we're thankful for the Jews. Oh, they've done all these things and not all of them are Jews who say they are Jews. We get it, but most of them there are Jews. Most of them are Jews. And their time will come. Have they defiled? Have they gone against? Yes, they have, but they've been blinded. That's why we're to pick them up. All right? We've been grafted in to provoke them to jealousy. Okay? We've been grafted in. The church has been grafted in. But you've got some of Judah. You've got some of the house of Israel, which is the bride of Christ, which is the 10,000 times 10,000. And then you've got the thousands of thousands ministering before them. That's the Judah portion. We're being taken out. We're being made to bring them to jealousy. Because for these last 2,000 years, it's been to the world. Make them blind so that I could bring the world, so that I could bring the group from the creation of days that has been corrupted by Lucifer, by the Antichrist that's coming. I need to bring them in. They were my creation in that portion. Those with the Spirit are going to the Spirit first. Do you understand how the beginning of the book, said it's those with the Spirit of God? And Romans told us that it's us, those who have the Spirit of God, who are the sons of God. And do you know what happens when you go to the end of the book? The beginning of the book, those with the Spirit of God. And when you go to the end of the book with 4 verses left in verse 17, what does it say? And the Spirit and the bride say, come. Wow. Awesome stuff, man. So awesome. What did we get here in Deuteronomy? I'm going to keep going for a little bit longer. What do we get here in Deuteronomy? I'm not going to be able to talk for my interview tomorrow. Yes, I will. A lot of honey and tea, right? Honey and coffee. What am I saying? Tea. Honey and coffee. So what do we know now in Deuteronomy? Well, we had covered some things here in Deuteronomy, right? We were talking about this connection to the time of being in the wilderness, and it was about the time of Moses. And then what happens in Deuteronomy? As Moses's days come to an end, right? This is like these seals coming to an end. We shared how it said how interesting this was in Deuteronomy 34 verse 3, that and the south of the plain and the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees. And the Lord said unto him, this is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob. And what do we see? And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died. What do we know happens at this point? The high priest Joshua, Yeshua, at this point is going to take over, and he's going to cross over. He's going to pass over the Jordan. And where is this? Look at what it's talking about. The city of palm trees that they're going to. We showed that this exact portion of time, being the end of seals, as Moses' time of the house of Israel comes to an end, as the typology of John the Baptist's time comes to an end, where he will have brought families, sons back to fathers, daughters to mothers, and so forth. That this same typology where Moses dies, but John is beheaded, and the other typology of Elijah, who is taken up in the whirlwind. These are all same typologies of time. And the palm trees are so fitting because we know, like Palm Sunday, we know that in the book of Revelation, in chapter 7, when the rapture of the great multitude comes in, there are those in white robes and those with palms in their hands. So at this time, when John the Baptist, when John the Baptist dies, when Moses' time over the house of Israel comes to an end, we go to the story of Mark, which would be when Mark's gospel is coming to an end. And what do we see in one of the typologies? We see the story of the transfiguration, which is after 6 days, as after 6 years. That would be after these, that would be after these 6 years of seals, and the Lord coming at the end of the 6th year, and what? Here for the 7th. So when we go to Mark's discourse and we see what it says, you don't read it in Luke. What happens? Here he is. He comes at the end of the 6th seal. The 7th year has started, and these guys come to him and they say, I thought Elijah was coming first. And he tells them Elijah did come first. He came first and restored all things. But they did unto him whatsoever they wished. And what was it they did? What is the typology? John was beheaded. Who was John? He was a type of Elijah. But Elijah wasn't killed. You see, the typology doesn't play out exactly the same, but the character, the typology of the person, of the things that they do. So he comes and restores all things. This is in Mark. It's not in Luke. The same period of time, the same typology of time with palms in their hands. We showed another fascinating thing with this in Mark. When we came into Mark and we follow the storyline and we go to the, what is it, the triumphal entry. When we go to the triumphal entry in, did I miss it? Or was it 8? There we go. Triumphal entry of Mark. Only in Mark, listen to what it says. You don't get it in Luke, but you get it in Matthew in a different sense. And what does he say? They spread garments in the many spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches of trees. See, they cut down branches of trees. They were crying. They're waving the palm branches in their hands. It's awesome. Awesome, awesome stuff. And so what happens when we get to the end of this with Deuteronomy? We now see the end of seals comes. This same typology that we were saying at the end of seals. Then who takes over? Joshua, Yeshua. Yeshua takes them over. And who's Yeshua? Well, remember, Joshua, Yeshua, had his name changed from Osi, Hosea, who is the son of Nun, who's working what? Well, he's from the house of Ephraim. He's now going to start working his second portion. And what's he going to do? He's going to take them over the Jordan. Wow. We talked about how the story of Jacob from here, you read into it and you read that there were giants in the land, right? You read about the giants in the land. And what happens when there's giants in the land? The equivalent, where is it? The equivalent of there being giants in the land is mid-trumpets. There were giants in the land. The equivalent is when the pit opens. The equivalent is when Satan is cast down and the pit is opened. And this is the story that we got from Joshua recently. Man, it just keeps going and going, guys. Look at Judges real quick. This one will just go quickly. The book of Judges is another one. It revealed in 21 chapters, but look what it did, just like Exodus. It went to us in reverse. So what if we go look up the typology in chapter 15, like the 7th year? Look at what Judges chapter 15 says. But it came to pass within a while after the time of the wheat harvest that Samson visited his wife and kid and said, I will go in unto my wife into the chamber. But her father would not suffer him to go in. Listen to what he says. And her father said, I verily thought that thou utterly hated her. Go, therefore, I gave her to thy companion. It's almost like a typology of Christ and the Holy Ghost. He says, is not the younger sister fairer? See, it's like what? It's like Leah, the one he didn't really want. He thought he utterly hated her. So the Father gives Leah to the Holy Spirit. Does that mean that Christ hates us? No. Does that mean that Christ doesn't want us? No. It's typologies of stories that have taken place that are revealing things in the end. And what do we see? Christ wanted the younger one. Christ came for the house of Israel. Christ came for the one that he created in the days of light. He wants the younger, fairer one, but he had to get the older one first. It's the story of Jacob playing out again. And when you go into these chapters, you get more of this same typology of the 14 to the 15th year, or the 21 years in reverse like this. These things, again, you look at these things and you say, how? You know, the only way these things can come about is if you first understand the Gospels. You must first understand who the Gospels are speaking to before you can understand any of this, before any of this begins to make sense. And you say, well, why? Why does this go in reverse? What's the point of seeing a chapters to years go in reverse? What's the point of Genesis being chapters to years and Zechariah and Hosea? The point is so that you can go in to these chapters and discern and read and pull out these things within them, so that as this time comes about, whoever we're leaving it for, whoever we're teaching, however it's going to play with whoever's working whenever, in every one of these chapters to years, there is information that can be pulled out of each of them relating either to the church, relating to Judah, relating to events that will happen to either of them or both of them, relating to an event that will take place on a global scale, maybe in this portion of the world, in that portion of the world. That's why there's this revelation of chapters to years that seems like the craziest thing to say, chapters to years. But you know what? This isn't something that I invented. Do you know that the book of Psalms, through, I believe it was J.R. Church, if I remember correctly, that had discovered that there was this chapter to annual events that were happening within the years in relation to the chapters of when Israel became a nation. So going to 1948, and they followed this all the way through, and J.R. Church said he believed it worked, but only up to the year 1999. After that, there seemed to be an issue. He couldn't quite discern how it worked out after that. Well, we discovered in this ministry that the portion it's going to count to starts in 118, or it's the same typology going in chapter 18. That 18 would be the beginning of it. That 18 and 118 are the same as being this portion at the time of the escape. That the Lord was going to come down and take out the bride portion. That there was going to be this crying out, this meteor or whatever might be coming during that 7 days, during that first week from the 14th to the 22nd in June. And then what we're going to see is like Luke 21. We're going to see these things, the something coming upon the earth that will have men's hearts failing them for fear of looking after these things. And then what do we get in 19? The circuit of the sun. June 22nd. The circuit of the sun, the 22nd into the 23rd, the peak of the height of the sun. And then we had the tribulation play out. And we knew that it went, the 14 years began at 19 or 119 and ended the 15th year in 33 or 133. What we didn't know when this was revealed, we've been talking about it, we've been sharing it for about a year or so, and then somebody sends me an email showing me that there's what's called the Psalms of Ascent. And these Psalms of Ascent say that from chapter 119 to 133 are called they're called the Psalms of Ascent, and it's 15 chapters. And that when you read it from the Septuagint formula or viewpoint, it starts in 119, not 120 or something like that. Well, that was exactly precisely what we'd been teaching in this ministry, but we were not only able to do it from the 100s, we were also able to do it from the teens. And it revealed incredible things, like this is chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What would happen at the end of the 6th year? What happens in the 6th year? Watch this. What if you go to chapter 24 in Psalms? It's the equivalent of the 6th year of seals. So when you're looking at these chapters to years, some of them might be events happening near the beginning of that year. Some of the events might be in the middle. Some of the events may relate to the end, or in some chapters it might be something that plays out through the whole year. In Psalms 24, it plays out as if it's the end of the 6th year. What happens at the end of the 6th year of seals? We see the Lord coming on heavenly Mount Zion, and they're saying, hide us from him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. And so what happens? Let's go to Psalms 124. Look what it says. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. What happens at the end of the 6th year of seals? It's the end of the church age. Now in this 7th year, the 144 will be sealed first, and then it'll be the gathering in of the great multitude rapture that will happen by Passover of that 7th year. In the midst of that 7th year, it will be the fullness of it. And what does it say? In verse 3, it says, who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who shall stand in his holy place? What do you mean ascend the hill of the Lord? That means he must be here on his hill. He must be here on heavenly Mount Zion. And look at what it says. He that has clean hands and a pure heart. What kind of hands are these? Hands that had to be made clean. Look. These hands had to be made clean. Wow. They weren't those like in Psalms 18, whose hands were hands of power. They were already clean. They were already in the Lord. These hands that had to be made clean are the same as these that had palms in their hands. The ones that had palms in their hands, in the hollow of their hand. And listen what it says. He said unto me, these are they which came out of great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white. So what did they have to do? They had to wash it. They had to launder their clothes. They had to be made white. They had to, just like Psalms is saying, this group that's able to ascend the hill of the Lord had to be made clean, which they were or will be during the time of seals. Isn't that incredible? Just awesome stuff. What happens if we go to the end? Look at this. Is it 32 or 33? Oh, 133. Let's go to the 100 portion. Look what happens at 133. What's 133? When it's over, the 14 years are over. And what happens at the beginning of this 15th or 22nd year when it's all over? It's the Jubilee, when they're going to all come back into the land. And listen to what it says. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. As the dew of Hermon, and as the dew that descended upon the Mount of Zion, for there the Lord commanded the blessings, even life forevermore. All in unity, dwelling in the land forevermore. Man, this stuff is so incredible. Okay, so many things. Ruth, many of you guys know the understanding with Ruth. I'm going to finish up here pretty quick. 1st and 2nd Samuel. What did we get about the kings recently? We've had some pretty fascinating stuff about the kings, haven't we? Because when it came to the kings, that was the one thing I touched on earlier that we've talked about quite a bit lately, which was when it came to the kings, there was a discrepancy that had been around forever until a couple guys wrote books and did deep studying on it. Now it's being taught as being truth and being understood as accurate, which was, as I was saying earlier with the blood moons, that the house of Israel counts from Nisan, which is why Christ came and fulfilled the house of Israel and fulfilled the spring feasts. The house of Judah counts from the fall feast, counts from Tishri. So when the kings of Israel count, and let's say from Nisan, but a king died and somebody took over as king, and maybe it was Elul. So it was the 6th month into the year. Well, what the house of Israel would do is they would say, okay, all of the rest of that year, which is maybe 8 months, when Nisan comes, we're going to count those 8 months as 1 year. So whether it was 8 months or 10 months or 5 months or 3 months, whatever it was, when Nisan came, they said you already completed 1 year. And so now from Nisan 1, you're starting your 2nd year. You see that? Even though it wasn't a full year. Whereas the house of Judah, what they did is they counted from Tishri. So if you came in, the king died and a new king took over, and maybe it was the month of Sivan, and there was still 3 or 4 months, whatever it is, before Tishri. Well, they don't do the same as the house of Israel. What they did is they said anything that was before Tishri 1, so even if it was Hanukkah, and it was in whatever that month is, Cheshvan, I think it is. Even if it was then, and you come all the way around to Tishri 1 of the following year, we're going to say all of that was just getting you ready. They call that a session. The house of Israel calls non-accession. The house of Judah says accession. So they say all of that was just a session. It was just getting you ready. Now we're going to start year 1. You see? So what happens is the house of Israel would have the beginning of the 2nd year, and the house of Judah would say you're starting your 1st. So there was always this discrepancy in year counts. This is why we understand the spring feast to the house of Israel, the fall feast now to the house of Judah. This was understood through this revelation with accession and reading about it. But for us, it made all the difference in the world, because when we understood that, we now understood the order of the feasts of the Lord, of which there were 3. And it begins with the Feast of Weeks to the Lord, the very first feast that the Lord made a covenant with man. Then we know the house of Israel being fulfilled when Christ came the first time, which means the fall feasts have to be fulfilled when he comes as Joshua, Yeshua, when he comes during the 7 years of trumpets. Okay, what else did we get? Look at this with 1 Kings. This is so awesome. You guys remember this one? This confirmed to us what we understood in the revelation of 14 years of when the foundation would be built and how long it would be before the temple was done. Listen to what it says. 1 Kings 6 verse 36 and 37. It says, in the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid. That's exactly what we know. By the 4th year, the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. When we went to Zechariah, what happened in Zechariah chapter 4? There's the 14 years. What happened in the 4th year? The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of the house of the Lord. So the foundation of the house of the Lord, while they've been removed from the land for those 7 years, only a small group will come back into the land to rebuild, but they're not going to get very far. They're only going to allow this foundation through all of this chaos that's going to be going on. Only the foundation is going to be laid. So again, it was confirming to us what we had understood, that the foundation is laid in the 4th year. And then it tells us, and in the 11th year, so in the 11th year, which means once 10 years is done, between day 1 and turning 11, that's the 11th year, it says, which is the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished. So from the time of the laying of the foundation until the time that of the 11th year, when the house was done being built, the temple was done, the total was 7 years. Well, that's exactly correct. See, foundation is laid in the 4th year, which is about 3.5 years in, and you have what? 3.5 years. 7th year of seals, 6th year, 5th year, there's 3 years, and the half year, which is in the 4th year. And then what? It was disrupted. They couldn't build anymore. Only the foundation was laid. So then when the Lord comes, what's going to happen at the start of the 8th year? They're going to start rebuilding. Now the temple is going to be rebuilt and the city and everything. And for the next 3.5 years, which brings you to what? In the 11th year, for a total of 7 years, of which 3.5 they couldn't build anything because of the chaos. And what happens? The next 3.5, or the first 3.5 years of trumpets, they will have rebuilt the temple, the city, and the streets. And what will it have been? The 11th year that the temple was built. You see how awesome that is? We didn't get that revelation from this. We had the revelation from all of these other places in scripture, especially Zechariah, that revealed when we got here the absolute confirmation of it all. So what happens when we go to Zechariah in it? Let's go to the 8th year and look what happens. The Lord says, I am returned unto Jerusalem. See, the mountain of the Lord. He came at the end of the 6th seal, the start of the 7th year, established by getting the 144 sealed, brought in the great multitude rapture. And then there was a deal, a peace agreement made with the Lord with all nations as the 7th seal. And then when trumpets begins, there's the Lord, heavenly Mount Zion. He tells them, let your hands be strong. And look, let your hands be strong, you that hear in these days the words by the mouth of the prophets, which were in the day that the foundation of the Lord's house was laid, which was in the 4th year. And then for 3.5, they couldn't do anything. So now what does he tell them? He says, before these days, there was nobody to hire nor beast, because what? There was no peace to them that went out or came in because of the affliction. For I set all men, everyone against his neighbor. Remember, he started the affliction at right towards the end of the 70th year. And the only ones that were able to go back and lay the foundation was that small group with Zerubbabel. This is fantastic stuff. All of this, you see, I'm going through this kind of piece by piece by piece. It's incredible things in here. You know, let's skip to, as I bring this to an end, let's go to Chronicles. What happens when we go into 2nd Chronicles? Well, we showed how it starts, right? How's it going to start? Well, we know Jerusalem is going to be surrounded and attacked. Remember how we said the year's end in Exodus chapter 34:22 was the circuit of the sun for June 22nd, going into the 23rd. This was the other year's end. This was the one that didn't line up with the other one because there were 2. This is the one that has the lapse of time, which is meaning the end relating to the year, which for the house of Judah is what? You got it. Tishri. The end of Elul, the beginning of Tishri, which is late September this year. What's going to happen? The typology of Ishmael, the king of the north, Syria, the lion of Daniel 7 is going to bring about the second attack. The first one will be by Iran, a short attack, which will be around the 9th of Av this year. A short war within the Middle East. Then there will be a peace declaration. And this peace declaration will bring about the second attack by Syria that will remove them from the land by the end of September. And it will be the beginning of the 14 years. This year's end attack comes from the declaration that will then be made. You see, Syria is going to come from the north with a small army. This same group is the typology in Jeremiah chapter 4. When the king of the north, when the lion from the north is coming, he's going to surround them and he's going to lay them waste, just as it says. But when we go back to Chronicles, what's the storyline to this? It's the 70, remember? It's the 70 years. Babylon is the first attack, right? Probably the Iran and some of the Middle East war, it'll be a short war. Look at that, for the 70 years and for the land to now enjoy her Sabbaths. But what happens? Cyrus, modern day Cyrus, is going to make a proclamation. And in this proclamation, he's going to tell them they can go and rebuild. And what's going to happen? The church is going to think it's the 7 years. Well, of course, tens of millions of people will have already vanished. This short war will have been settled. Cyrus makes this decree. The Jews think they're going to be allowed to go and rebuild. That is when the 50 days comes to an end. And Syria comes down from the north and becomes the second attack after that decree of the modern day Cyrus. This is the second attack, which is the fast of Gedaliah, that 7th month, right at the end of the year to the beginning of day 1, which is why the 7th month of Zechariah 7 said the 7th month fasting and mourning. The first attack was for the 5th month. The second attack 50 days later is the one at the start of the 7th that will remove them from the land. This, brothers and sisters, I'm going to finish it up right here because I can keep going. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, this is the declaration of Cyrus, then sudden destruction comes upon them. You see, the bride's already gone. There was a group already taken out in the escape. This is not talking about the escape. The bride is gone. There's going to be a worker group chosen, as we know, with the 40 days of the Lord. And then what's going to happen is this right here is the declaration by Cyrus after the first attack by Iran and that Middle East breaking out. It's going to be crazy. There's going to be chaos. The world is going to be in a panic still, and even more. And Cyrus, this modern day Cyrus, will make this decree. And when this decree is made, Syria is the sudden destruction that will come from the north. And watch this. Then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Watch this. And they shall not escape. Listen to this. You are children of the light and children of the day. Who are the ones of children of the light, brothers and sisters? You got it. The second group in the creation of days. The sleeping church, right? The sleeping church that was corrupted by Lucifer, the other light, the false light. But they're children of the light. They're going to start waking up during the time of the greatest revival in human history. But watch this. Let's prove that this is the time. It says, as travail upon them, upon travail upon a woman with child. Watch this. This word, 5604, is used 4 times. You want to see where it's used? I'm going to prove it to you. 5604. It's used 4 times. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Acts 2, and 1 Thessalonians 3. Do you know what all 4 of these have in common? All 4 of these equal right here. All 4 of them. Want me to prove it to you? Remember, it's not in Luke. It's in Mark's discourse. And look at what he says. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and there shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrows. There it is. The beginning. This is the beginning of the 14 years. What about Matthew? Same thing. It's at the beginning of everything for them. What does he say to them? Same thing. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Remember what's going to happen with their famines and pestilence that's going to come upon them right off the bat when they flee. Remember what we said about the famines? What are they going to be doing according to Leviticus 26? That disgusting thing, because he's going to go contrary to them. And these are just the beginnings of sorrow. See, it's the beginning. Do you know where else it said it? It said it in Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 is what? Pentecost. Where's Pentecost? Where's Pentecost in this story? Right here. The 50 days, and then what's going to happen? The first attack on Judah. The first attack. After that first attack, in this period of time, a decree is going to be made. That decree by Cyrus is made, boom, causes the second attack. Now they're going to be gone from the land. Where was it in Acts chapter 2? Verse 24, if I remember correctly. See? Whom God hath raised, having loosed the pains of death. There it is right there. And then, of course, as we just said, 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 3. Man, I know you guys know I could just keep going and going and going. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. See how awesome that was? What did we just cover? A huge chunk of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges a little bit, Ruth we've already understood, not so much in Samuel, Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, there was some great stuff. Chronicles, we touched on a couple things. And of course, much of this brought us into Psalms and brought us into, well, Daniel, we can touch at a future point. Ezekiel, we'll touch at a future point. We'll go into all of these in another upcoming video as we lay it all out from the beginning to the end. Maybe that's what today's video will be called, From the Beginning to the End, Part 1. From beginning to end, Part 1. This is the stuff, guys, that will just be jam-packed. I mean, you want a total overview, a total revelation being put together through it all, parts and pieces throughout the whole thing. This is going to be a series to watch. We'll call it a series. How's that? This is going to be a powerful one to watch. All right, brothers and sisters, I love you. God bless you. Man, it's exciting. I know many people are watching for Passover, and let's keep watching. It's an exciting time regardless. Some things may begin. We know it's not going to be the pre-trib, but we know this will be connected to the time of the great multitude mid-trib rapture. And man, is this all ever exciting. We know this is there's something is brewing, as we know. But when will it all change? Brothers and sisters, this is the time right here. All right. Jesus told us, as it was in the days of Noah in Luke, he told us it for this portion when he begins his 40 days right here. Prior to that, they were eating and drinking. They were marrying and given in marriage. Nobody was the wiser until the door was shut. I love you, brothers and sisters. I'm going to stop myself because I feel like going more. I love you. God bless you. God bless your families. And stay tuned, because I'm sure the next post will be the interview with Deep Believer, which I am so excited for. And let's pray hundreds of thousands come to watch. I love you guys. God bless you. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.